This is CineBack for the ZV-E10 and ZV-E10 II. There's tons of mounting points and protection all the way around the rig. There's also a lot of ways to run cables and keep everything nice and tidy and managed. It also has a rotatable D-tap connector, so you can have cables going toward the back or toward the front. And in this video, we're going to talk about how this works, how you can install your camera and get it all set up. And if that wasn't enough, this version of CineBack works with a total of 7 different Sony cameras. So you can downgrade, upgrade, and use it with multiple models thanks to a whole bunch of adapters that come with the kit. Now let's get into cage compatibility and installing the ZV-E10 and ZV-E10 II onto CineBack. First, I want to note that these cameras are very interesting for this project, but a lot of you have asked for them. So here we are going to be doing some interesting tricks to get this to work. And so here's what we're going to do. We're going to start with the ZV-E1 or the original ZV-E10. And the first thing we need to do is actually remove it from the cage. So this one wasn't screwed in. We're going to set the camera aside, and we're actually going to perform one small modification to this cage. We need to drill out the threads where the screw goes through the cage into the bottom of the camera. So we're actually going to grab ourselves a drill with either a 1/4 inch bit, or if you're over in millimeter land, we're going to want a 7mm, 6.5, 7mm bit. Then you're going to literally drill out the threads so that we can send a bolt through the bottom of this cage. And this will all make more sense later. So it doesn't ruin the cage. You can still use the screw that comes with the small rig cage here. It's going to be just fine. It just doesn't have threads anymore. So now we're going to reinstall the camera, but we're not going to put in the screw just yet. So now we're going to set this aside. We're going to get rid of the ZV-E2 for a little bit and talk about the shims or adapter plates that are needed to make this work. Since this version of CineBack works with 7 different cameras, we've included a ton of different accessories so that you can mount different cameras, upgrade, downgrade as you see fit, and it'll work with all of them. So what we're going to need is the plate that is titled E, as well as the plate that is entitled F. So we're going to set A aside for a little bit, and we'll get these installed on CineBack. Each one requires 2 of the 4 included small screws that are silver. The E plate is going to be installed right here on the bottom inside of CineBack, and we want this slot to line up with the slot in the metal plate. And we've got the 2 screws installed, so that's ready to go. Don't have to make it too snug, just get it on there so it doesn't shift around. Next, we'll take the spacer that's entitled F, or is marked F, and we're going to put it bevel forward right here on the cage so that these 2 holes line up with these 2 slots on CineBack. And there's what it looks like installed. Those 2 holes line up with those 2 slots. Next, we're going to take our camera and cage that does not have that thread down at the bottom of the camera, and we're going to slide it in here. We'll use 2 of the long screws that come with the kit, and then the longest single screw in the entire kit is going to go in the bottom. So I've put those in loosely, and now we're going to flip the whole thing over and stick the extra long screw through the plate, through the spacer, through the cage, and into the actual camera. That's why this screw is so stinking long. Now, we want to kind of push the back of the camera forward, and you can kind of see down in there the silver thread in the center where the camera is. So now we're going to run this thing all the way down in there and go ahead and snug it up. You just want to make sure everything is aligned and that camera is all the way seated forward. So now we can grab this guy and tighten it down, and this we will tighten all the way down. You'll feel the camera get nice and snug. We don't want to over tighten, just enough to snug things up. And now we can flip things over, make sure we've got good alignment on the camera, and we'll go ahead and tighten the top 2 screws. Just finish those off. Now we'll look on the side, and you'll see that things are looking really nice here. If it looks like the screen's a little wonky, you can actually loosen the bottom screw here, slide it forward or back to kind of bend or twist really the camera back into place. Really not, we're not twisting the camera, we're just aligning things correctly. And the last thing we need to do to finish up this CineBack is going to be dealing with the screen here. Since we want this CineBack to work with so many different Sony cameras, we have a little bit of a problem in that the screen here, because this thing is so tiny and we're sticking it in this rig, the screen is actually sticking out a little bit, kind of like this instead of perfectly parallel. So we have devised a little spacer that'll go here with a foam pad to protect the screen and get the angle just right. So to install that, we're going to grab a Phillips screwdriver, remove these 2 screws. We'll set those screws aside, and we're going to take this spacer, which I don't know if you can see that there, but there's actually a bevel and kind of a ramp, and we're going to tilt it toward the camera. So it's actually tilted this way down toward the screen so that it'll cradle the screen of the camera just right. Now we'll take those same 2 screws that we removed earlier and we'll put them back in. Again, not very tight. We're just putting in a plastic piece here. Now we can grab this foam pad and peel off the paper backing, and we are going to install this thing on top of that ramp right there. Just like that. Perfect. Now when we close the screen, it perfectly rests against that foam protector so that we can run around filming and we know our screen isn't going to be damaged against anything. So that is getting the ZV-E10 Mark I, or the original, installed. Now let's take a look at the Mark II. To install the ZV-E10 II into CineBack, we're going to need a couple different pieces of hardware. First, we have 2 spacers, and these have the labeling A, and that is going to go on the inside top of CineBack, and the other is E, and that is going to go on the inside bottom of CineBack. We'll put those in just a second using these 4 silver screws, but we're also going to need a 1/4 inch to 3/8 inch adapter, and you'll see why we need that right now. On the top of the cage for the ZV-E10 II, you'll notice that, first of all, to get things centered, we kind of have some funky situations with threads. This one is too big, so we're going to shrink it with one of these. So, simply put, I'm going to grab a flathead screwdriver or even with my hands here, just thread this thing in until the top of it is flush with the cage. So you can see that's now nice and flush. It is going to stick down just a little bit above the lens. Now we can open up the camera screen and set the camera aside for a moment and install our 2 spacers. Here I've added the E spacer on the bottom. Again, we want this slot right here to line up with the bottom center slot of CineBack. And here I've got the A, or the top spacer, with 2 screws in there. And now we're going to install that with the bevel facing forward right here. And our goal here is to have these 2 holes line up with the 2 slots on CineBack. I'll go ahead and snug those up. Again, we don't have to torque those down super hard. We just need to keep it from shifting back and forth. With those installed, we are now ready to insert the camera. So we're going to line things up, stick it in there, and it's okay if you feel like you need to lift up this front part of the top plate. That's completely fine and normal. And now we're going to line up the top threads of the cage, including that silver one that we installed, with these 2 slots, and we'll put our 2 screws in. And we're going to be using 2 of the longer screws for the top and 1 of the medium screws for the bottom. I like to start by doing the left top screw first, and we won't go all the way tight because we want to be able to shift it around, as you can see. And then we're going to do the right top. And what's going to want to happen is when you put this screw in, it's going to thread into that silver adapter we put in, and it's probably going to try to thread it down toward the camera lens. So what I would recommend you do is flip things over, and you can see it sticking down here. Just keep a thumb on that so that it doesn't keep threading down toward the camera. We want it to stay inside of the cage. Next, we can flip things over and put in the last screw near the front on the bottom of the cage. So I'm going to go ahead and thread that in. And with that done, we can tighten up all the screws. We'll flip things over, close the screen, and check for our spacing. If things look nice and parallel, that's great. Just leave it alone. If it looks a little cockeyed, the screen compared to the actual rig, you can actually loosen the bottom of the camera screw and move it forward and back to bring that into alignment. And the last thing we need to do to finish up this CineBack is going to be dealing with the screen here. Since we want this CineBack to work with so many different Sony cameras, we have a little bit of a problem in that the screen here, because this thing is so tiny and we're sticking it in this rig, the screen is actually sticking out a little bit, kind of like this instead of perfectly parallel. So we have devised a little spacer that'll go here with a foam pad to protect the screen and get the angle just right. So to install that, we're going to grab a Phillips screwdriver, remove these two screws. We'll set those screws aside and we're going to take this spacer, which I don't know if you can see that there, but there's actually a bevel and kind of a ramp. And we're going to tilt it toward the camera. So it's actually tilted this way down toward the screen so that it'll cradle the screen of the camera just right. Now we'll take those same two screws that we removed earlier and we'll put them back in. Again, not very tight. We're just putting in a plastic piece here. Now we can grab this foam pad and peel off the paper backing, and we are going to install this thing on top of that ramp right there. Just like that. Perfect. Now when we close the screen, it perfectly rests against that foam protector so that we can run around filming and we know our screen isn't going to be damaged against anything. Now let's take a second to talk about powering your camera with CineBack. Depending on the CineBack unit you have, you're going to have a battery plate on the back with a power switch, and then it's going to send power from the battery to these 4 D-taps. From those D-taps, there are several ways to power your camera. The first method is to use what is often called a dummy battery or a battery coupler. This very simply is a D-tap cable that connects to a dummy battery, which is not a real battery, it's just a housing, and that goes in your camera. This is super simple. Power goes from here to here. The only thing you need to pay attention to is to make sure this is converting full voltage from your battery to the correct voltage for your camera. So some of these cables don't do that. That's not good. You want to make sure you get a cable that does. We'll include a couple in the product page for this version of CineBack. There are some people out there, however, that don't want to mess with that, and they go with the second route, which is a great one, and that is power delivery. These devices that we're looking at here take the same D-tap connection, and they go to usually some kind of box or device that converts it down to a power delivery over USB-C. This plugs into most modern cameras and is going to give you plenty of juice. You'll have a battery in the grip of the camera, and this is going to charge and help power your camera with that battery. The nice thing about these is they're a little safer because you're converting the voltage down to something nice and low and safe. And if something goes wrong with this cable, you're going to have the power built into the camera's battery that is in the grip. That said, you really want to make sure you get a good power delivery cable and that you know what's coming out of this USB-C connector, because there are cables on the internet that go from D-tap to USB-C that send the full voltage coming from your battery. That could fry your camera. So here I have 2 variants from Condor Blue. One is a D-tap to female USB-Cs. You can use your own cable. One is a inline with a straight cable. You just have to rig them up, plug it in, and plug this end into your camera. Another note on CineBack and this D-tap connector, it is actually reversible. So if you have a camera that is really close to your CineBack and you don't want the cables going toward the grip because you want to be able to hold that camera, for example, here I have the Sony ZV-E1. If I plug in a cable going this way, you can see it's going to run right into the camera handle. It might press buttons, and maybe I don't have a top handle and I actually want my hand to be right here. Well, that's going to be kind of a problem. So this orientation would be very helpful because the cable is going to go backward away from the grip. So now I can still use the grip of the camera. But often you have another grip, or for whatever reason, you don't really care about this stance. Maybe you're more this stance or something else way out here, and you don't mind and would prefer the cables to go toward the camera to keep things nice and tidy on the back of your rig or keep cables from kinking. This plate can be rotated. So what you do is reverse or remove these 4 screws like this, and you can very gently, and I mean gently, pull it up, and now you can rotate it 80 degrees like that and reinsert it in the same spot. Now we can put those 4 screws back and the cables will be going the other direction. And just like that, our cables are now going to go toward the camera. So I can plug this cable in right here. And as you can see, it's going toward the camera, nice and tidy on the back. So you have 2 options to go with depending on the setup you want to run. So that is CineBack for the Sony ZV-E10 and ZV-E10 II. Check the product page for more information on what other cameras work with this version of CineBack. Other accessories and information can be found there. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in our next product video.